Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Brown, the Artistic Director of Opera Lafayette, and with me is Gilbert Suazo Sr. and Patricia Michaels of the Taos Pueblo. We are all here at the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation of New Mexico in Taos, and it's a great privilege for me to have both Gil and Patricia as my guests today and as Opera Lafayette's guest. As you know, we're preparing the opera Silvain here in Taos at the Wurlitzer Foundation. And in fact, today was the first day we went through the entire opera, and tomorrow we'll do a kind of public dress rehearsal at the Taos Community Auditorium. But at the center of our opera is the issue of land, land defending the land, and the loss of land or the loss of the use of land. And of course, no one is more familiar with defending the land and the issues of loss of land than my guests here in Taos. And so we've asked Gilbert Suazo to speak about a very important reclamation of land, which occurred in 1970. So I'd like to read a bio of Mr. Suazo and then turn it over to him for the PowerPoint about the reclamation of Blue Lake. Mr. Gilbert Suazo Sr. is a Taos Pueblo tribal member, served as governor in 2007 and 2018, and is a lifetime tribal council member. In 1970, Mr. Suazo, as a member of the younger generation of Taos Pueblo, testified before the Senate Indian Affairs Committee hearings in the tribe's effort for restoration of Blue Lake to tribal ownership. In 2008, he again testified before the Senate Indian Affairs Committee for the Pueblo's water right legislation involving the waters of the Blue Lake watershed. Gilbert was part of the delegation in Taos Pueblo's historic White House meeting on July 8, 1970, when President Richard Nixon pledged his support to return Blue Lake to the Taos Pueblo. He continues to be an advocate for the protection of Pueblo lands and water rights. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Gil.
Hio puyanam kolkinam maya homo. Pero pitho sama ho mamat oyan na yo nahi atung yai detat ein kiu pawai haba pawapana hikimualai. Good afternoon. My name is Gilbert Suazo. My Tiwa Indian name is Kulkwina. That translates to standing wolf. That's the name that my community knows me by more. Today, I'm going to speak to you about Taos Pueblo lands and the return of Blue Lake to Taos Pueblo. The first slide that you see is about the Great Seal of Taos Pueblo. It captures the scenery of the Pueblo that is a very famous scenery, the sacred Taos Mountain in the background, the North Village in the front, and then a quiver of bow and arrows with 3 of the governing canes that were presented by past governments to Taos Pueblo as a recognition of our tribal sovereignty. The quiver stands for our long-standing protection of our tribal lands. The name of our place is Tuatha. It also known as the place of the Red Willows. Taos Pueblo Tuatha is the place of the Red Willows at the emergence of the water's journey. This is the water that comes from Blue Lake. Our ancestral Aboriginal area included north-central, northeastern New Mexico, and into Colorado. The Taos Pueblo village is at 7,000 feet elevation, and we are a World Heritage Site recognized by the United Nations for our enduring structures and our living culture. The next slide shows a photograph of Taos Pueblo with the Taos Mountain in the background, the North Village in the forefront there. There's a similar village on the south side of what you see here. The pole in the middle is a ceremonial pole that is erected every year for our tribal ceremonial feast day on September 30th. Next slide shows the Taos Pueblo stream, Teotapa'ana. You can see the red willows on the right-hand side there, for which we name our place. Willows are an indication of water, so this is how we attach the importance of the name to the willows that grow there. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our Taos Pueblo people. We have been in this region since time immemorial. You cannot put a date to the time that our people first came into this valley. We speak the Tiwa language, and over the centuries, our people have been hunters, agriculturalists, gatherers, and builders. We are a very traditional, conservative, and adaptable people. Our Taos Pueblo government is a traditional unwritten system. We have a tribal council that is the policy-making body that is made up of former tribal leadership officials and religious leaders. The governor's office is headed by the governor with his staff, and they tend to the domestic, civil, and external business affairs of the tribe. The war chief and his staff of 12 men are the protectors and the caretakers of lands and natural resources of the Pueblo. I'm sharing with you a photograph of 2018 when I was governor for my people in that year. I am holding the ceremonial canes that I spoke about in the other slide. There are 6 of these ceremonial canes, that each one of them having a very symbolic meaning. Our traditions and our culture are very complex. We have activities year-round. But the people, the land, the places on the land, the water, the crops we grow, the wild plants that we gather, the birds, the animals, the seasons of the year, the heavenly bodies all have a role and place in the culture. Teotapa'ana, the village, and Blue Lake are core cultural places. And Blue Lake, with its watershed, nourishes our traditional, spiritual, and physical needs. We also, since 1500s, are Christians. Christianity is a way that we follow along with our Indian way of life. And we have the St. Jerome Catholic Church situated within the Taos Pueblo village. All is our blessing, a blessing of our cultural identity. I'd like to speak a little bit about our ancestral lands, because these are lands that we once claimed ownership by usage of these lands. It's a very vast area of occupation that we had up into south central Colorado, north central New Mexico, into the Great Plains, and then, of course, the whole Taos Valley. It's approximately 60,000 square miles, 37 million acres of land that our people used in our ancestral times by our ancestors for hunting, for their livelihood, for gathering of foods and herbs, and for their cultural practices. We do have place names for these areas, and archaeological sites attest to our presence in these areas. Some areas, of course, are shared with other tribes, and this is a way that it has been over the time before the Europeans came onto this continent. Many areas were shared by many different tribes, but tribes also had their home areas. For us, the Taos Valley was destined to be our homeland, and this is where we've lived since time immemorial. Our present day lands are 110,000 acres from the Rio Grande to Alpine Peaks at 13,000 feet elevation. We have farm fields that are prehistoric and historic farmlands that we have used over the years into historic times. We have the Blue Lake Wilderness area that I'll be speaking more about. And then there's the Taos Pueblo Ranch on the east side of the Blue Lake area that serves as a protective buffer for the Blue Lake area. We have tracts A, B, and C, which are replacement lands and other lands that we've acquired through purchase. We have the Taos Pueblo grant that was granted under the Spanish government and recognized by the Mexican governments. And there's checkerboard lands. These are lands that are away from our main land base, but are within the Taos Valley. The next slide shows Taos Pueblo lands. Right in the center, or slightly to the left, is the Taos Pueblo Grant. And then to the right of that is the Blue Lake Wilderness area that is 48,000 acres of wilderness land. And the right side of that is the Taos Pueblo Ranch that is near the Eagle Nest Valley in New Mexico. And of course, over on the left side, where along the Rio Grande is the tracts A and B, and then tract C up in the mountains adjacent to the Wheeler Peak Wilderness area. There's some slides here that show our homeland. The first one is the buffalo pasture. This is a very lush area, but it is also a culturally important area. It's a wetland, a natural wetland, and our people use that area for cultural purposes as well as for grazing of our buffalo herd that is maintained by the tribe. The next slide shows the herd of buffaloes within the buffalo pasture with the mountains in the background there. And then the next slide shows Mahualuna. That's the Taos Mountain. This is a sacred mountain, and this is a mountain that is visible from anywhere in the Taos Valley. It's a mountain that I've always remember as a child. When I wake up and go outside, that's the very first thing that I would see is that sacred Taos Mountain. I'd like to now go into the taking of our lands and how it happened over the years. I always say that it started in 1492 when Christopher Columbus landed in the Americas, and then went into the 1500s with the arrival of the European explorers and missionaries. With their presence, there was began to be infringement on lands and in our culture that led to the 1680 Pueblo Revolt. Now, our people, Taos Pueblo, had a very prominent role in that particular revolt, and actually the Pueblo tribes of New Mexico recovered all the lands that had been taken over by the early Spanish colonists and missionaries. Eventually, of course, the Spanish government came back, and there was resettlement of these lands that had been taken away, but it was with more respect, you might say, for our people as the owners and as the protectors of the culture that we were living under. And the important thing is that our people never relinquished ownership of our lands. Now, over the years, there was some restoration of some of our lands. In the 1920s and 30s, the Pueblo Lands Board was established, and their findings in their investigation about taking of Pueblo lands enabled the restoration of some of the lands that were lost through squatting and just taken. And these lands were restored through purchase. Compensation was provided with which replacement lands could be bought by the Pueblo to restore the lands that were lost through the squatting and the taking of lands in the prior years. Now, the United States Indian Claims Commission that was established in the 1940s affirmed ownership of our lands that we claimed, but they could not restore our ownership of those lands. So the return of these lands was not possible except by congressional action. The federal government, of course, had never returned land to any Indian tribe, so it seemed like an impossibility for having any of our lost lands returned to the Pueblo. Now, I would like to focus on the taking of Blue Lake, a very important area for our tribe. It's a cultural resource area for our tribe. In 1906, President Roosevelt authorized the taking of the Blue Lake area for national forest use. There was no consultation with Taos Pueblo, and the taking was not immediately known or understood by our people at Taos Pueblo. The only way that we begin to realize what happened was through the federal government as they asserted control over the areas that we thought were under our ownership. So naturally, there were conflicts and confrontations that occurred in the subsequent years. So with that, a struggle that was to last some 90 years was underway. Now, the next slide talks about the tribe's decision to fight for our lands and for Blue Lake. So since 1906, our tribe protested the taking of our land, especially the Blue Lake area. A special use permit for the Blue Lake area was issued, but that did not work for our people. There continued to be infringements on traditional uses that continued. Then in the 1940s and 50s, the Aboriginal Land Claim Commission was established, and Taos Pueblo filed an Aboriginal land claim through this Indian Claims Commission. In 1965, the Claims Commission affirmed our ownership of the areas that we were claiming, including Blue Lake. But of course, they could not return the land back to us. Now, our Aboriginal claim involved where the town of Taos presently sits, the Blue Lake area up in the mountains, and what is was termed as the Aboriginal area that includes the whole of Taos Valley and the surrounding mountain lands, which of course is a greatly reduced area from the vast ancestral area that I described earlier. As I said, the U.S. Claims Commission had no provisions for return of lands, only for monetary compensation. Monetary compensation was not acceptable to our people for the Blue Lake area. So the decision was, we will fight for Blue Lake. This is a decision, one of the most important decisions that I believe our tribal council made at the time, to fight for the return of Blue Lake, whatever it took. Our Aboriginal land claim then had to be held in abeyance, and the only available option to get Blue Lake back was through an act of Congress. So we had to go through the Washington, D.C. process for congressional legislation, and that began in the 1960s. Now, all the intricacies and complexities of Washington, D.C. would be confronted. I think at the time, our tribe decided to fight. We didn't realize how great that those complexities would be for our people. But somehow or another, our people made a very, very brave decision to fight for our Blue Lake. The next slide that you see is a photograph of Blue Lake itself. The lake is about 11,000 feet elevation, high up in the alpine mountains above Taos Pueblo. The Washington, D.C. process in Congress involved legislation that had to be introduced, and the early legislation was introduced by a New Mexico Senator, Clinton Anderson, but his legislation was very limited in the area of the return and the times of usage for us. So that, of course, was unacceptable to Taos Pueblo. Our support from Congress actually came from outside of New Mexico. The bill for the Pueblo was introduced by Florida Congressman James Haley. The Senate leadership was provided by Oklahoma Senator Fred Harris. So much of our support from in Congress came from people that were outside of New Mexico. Now, Senator Anderson's power and influence seemed to be insurmountable, but with the support that we were beginning to get, our momentum was building up. Now, in the D.C. process, we wondered where the White House was in this whole issue. We knew that within the administration, the Department of Interior was in favor of our getting the land back, but the Department of Agriculture was in opposition mainly because this is where the Forest Service resides, and the area was a national forest land, and they were opposed to our getting the land back. They wanted to maintain it as a national forest. Now, on July the 8th, President Richard Nixon invited the Taos Pueblo delegation to the White House. This was, in a way, kind of a surprise because we did not know at that time where the president and the administration stood in the way of our issue for the return of Blue Lake. In that meeting, the president pledged support for the return of Blue Lake to Taos Pueblo, and further, the return of Blue Lake would serve as a cornerstone for a new policy for American Indians that the president was going to unveil on that day. The next slide shows the meeting that we had on July the 8th, 1970, in the executive room of the White House, with the president sitting on the right side, flanked by our governor and our tribal council spokesman. On the left side there, I'm sitting there next to the vice president and next to one of our tribal councilmen, and the rest of our delegation and White House staff is sitting around the table. This is a very historic photograph of a very historic meeting that to this day is viewed as one of the most significant meetings that the United States government has had with an Indian tribe. Now, the next day, on July the 9th, 1970, our delegation, the Taos Pueblo delegation, endured a very hostile and intimidating Senate committee hearing. It was a very difficult time for our delegation after the day that we had the day before, where the president pledged his support. But in December of 1970, the United States Senate then voted in the full Senate 70-12 in favor of Taos Pueblo to get Blue Lake back. And on December the 5th, 1970, President Nixon, as he promised, signed the Blue Lake Bill into law. In 1971, Taos Pueblo held a grand victory celebration followed by commemoration events that we hold every 20 years. Now, to wind up my presentation, what happened after the return? There's always unfinished business after something like that. One of the things was in the 1970s, boundary corrections had to be made. Surveys had to be corrected for the Wheeler Peak Wilderness area, for our Track C area, and for the Blue Lake Wilderness area that was returned. So subsequently, Bear Lake, that had been in the Wheeler Peak Wilderness area, turned out to be within the Pueblo's Track C area. So that was restored to us. And then in 1984, finally, the land claim settlement that was in abeyance for those many years were finally settled. And this was for the Aboriginal claim and for the town of Taos area. And one of the strange things you might say that happened was that the streets of the town of Taos remain under Taos Pueblo ownership. Every plot of land that was part of the town of Taos was carefully surveyed, but the streets were neglected, and as a result, the streets still remain under Taos Pueblo ownership. Now, in 1996, an area that was also omitted from the original Blue Lake return, which we term as the Path of Life area. This is a path that runs from the Pueblo village up to Blue Lake. That area was still within the Wheeler Peak Wilderness area, but in 1996, President Clinton signed the bill that restored the Path of Life area to Taos Pueblo. Now, in 2010, the Taos Pueblo Indian Water Rights Settlement was achieved, and that involves water from Blue Lake and the Blue Lake watershed. In summary, it took 90 years to have the Blue Lake lands returned, including the Path of Life area. The Indian policy that was announced on July the 8th in our presence, when the president pledged his support for Blue Lake, continues now with the Blue Lake return as a cornerstone of that policy, and that policy continues to be beneficial for Indian tribes nationwide to this day. We are still working on airspace protection over Taos Pueblo and the Blue Lake Wilderness area. That needs to be secured so that the area will be free of low-flying aircraft. Also, other areas of cultural use and significance still need to be restored to Taos Pueblo ownership. Now, the final slide that I'm showing here is about a scene from the 1971 Blue Lake Victory celebration, where we had hundreds of people, tribes from all across the country at our home place to celebrate with us the return of Blue Lake. This was the first time that the federal government ever returned land to an Indian tribe. This is why it remains as such a tremendous victory for Indian tribes across the nation. We love our homelands. The return of Blue Lake means security and assurance of our cultural identity. It'll mean the protection of cultural sites, of our traditional uses, and our natural and cultural resources. It means a continuation of our cultural relationship with our land by future generations. It recognizes the past Taos Pueblo leaders who over the years never ceased to assert ownership of the area and never gave up the fight. And finally, justice served for our people. Thank you.
It's an extraordinary story, Gilbert. I mean, I think new probably to much of our audience. An extraordinary story, of course, about your people over thousands of years, but also an extraordinary specific story about your going to Washington and witnessing this transfer. Of course, a lot of our audience is in Washington and will be familiar with the complexities of the DC and the legislative process. And
Right.
They'll probably get a real kick out of that. But it's amazing to me that both this and we talked last week about another historic piece of land legislation which involved the Lobato versus Taylor up in the San Luis Valley, and that this area has been the site of two such important cases, and they both involve this movement and of people between the mountains and the valleys, and show that you can't separate the two, that your lives have been intertwined with both the valley and the mountain, not only through the water, but through so many other ways. I find it really, I mean, how exciting to be I'm not a young man going to Washington and being a part of this process and being able to push it forward and help your people with matters of the land. And I wonder, as we turn now to Patricia, and who is a younger generation at the Pueblo, I wonder how, Patricia's, in your career, you have incorporated your love of the land and your defense of the land in your work. And first, I think I should tell our audience, I don't think I said this before, that Patricia is the costume designer for our opera. And it was a wonderful, fortuitous thing to have you with us. And Patricia has been an haute couture, a designer in Santa Fe for years, but has worked has been all around the world. And if Gilbert's story is one perhaps of Taos and Washington, yours probably is a little bit more Taos and New York. Even with Project Runway, going to New York or something. But I think I would encourage our audience to put questions in the chat of Gilbert that he may be able to answer a bit later, and I will receive them here on we texted them so that I can see them. But Patricia, could you tell us how you, as a young person getting into this field, incorporated your love of the land, your defense of the land in your work?
Yes, and thank you. It's an honor to be here with Gilbert Suazo, who is always respected elder in our Pueblo, and I never thought I would ever be able to be in the presence of his knowledge and his life and his experiences and his kind words that he always has to share with our people. So thank you for having me be a part of this.
It's our honor.
So with that, when I create my fashion and my textiles and what I do. I was taught at a very young age not to give what is sacred of our village to the public, that it belongs to our people. So with that, when I participate, the feelings I get, the good feelings that I feel when I'm in ceremonies or when I'm with my people, things that I see, light, sound, dance, it's about the mood. So when you look at my fashion, it's very abstract. It doesn't scream native. And I try to create an ambiance of how beautiful we are if we recognize ourselves as individuals with significant contributions to a community. And that's what Taos Pueblo is. It is a community. It recognizes that we're like botanists. We're not people that are savages praising the earth and whatnot. No, we go outside and we acknowledge what the new day has to bring us, what is, there, and what can we be thankful for. And with that, I feel that people work so fast, they work so hard, that half the time they don't get to acknowledge all that Mother Earth and her surroundings are giving us: the sky, the water, the sun, the moon. And if you take the time to appreciate these important elements that gives us our existence, then I create clothing that is like a shell of appreciation for you. And it's my way of giving back to who I am as a Native American from my Pueblo, who I'm so proud of because of all the, we're related through my son. This is my son's godfather. So we call one another Kamaili Kampaili.
And I have to tell our audience that Patricia's son is named Mozart.
Yeah, my son's name is Mozart. And my daughter's name is Margot. That's so lyrical, but she's really smart. But nonetheless, it's like he said, 90 years of our Pueblo. That's only one recording of our fights. Our Pueblo has many other battles that they have won. But this one, it's just one of the places that I'm so proud of my people. And if I can't celebrate the opportunities that they have given me, and I can't respect the talents then that somebody bigger than us has given me, then I'm not doing what the gift is for then myself and my children. My children are talented. My grandfather was talented. My grandmother was great at sewing too on both my parents' side. I come up from a family of dancers and singers and performance artists. And my mom used to lobby a lot for what she called delegate at large. I have no idea what that is. I'm not the politician, but I do believe that as Native Americans, we need to find our niche and be responsible how to help carry the beauty and the strength of our people. And that is preservation of culture, lands, water, the environment.
And I see that immediately in your work.
Thank you.
You literally use whether it be flowers or earth or sky or water, you can see that in your costumes themselves.
Yes.
And I remember that wonderful picture of the dress with the chamisa. You call it the chamisa.
Oh, yes.
For those Easterners who haven't been out here to see the chamisa in bloom, it's extraordinary yellow and something to behold. And the dress that person was wearing took me directly to that.
Thank you. And that took 1 month to make.
Yeah.
So some of the garments are so involved and they're textured with different fabrications of fiber. And, now there's new technology that I'm dabbling in with fun fabrications, which this is interesting because I get to do that with my children, Mozart and Margot. They, in college, they've learned a lot. So we play with different imagery. But I also feel like coming back into my studio, doing hand quality. Working with my hands remind me of my grandfather. He was a great hunter and he used to tan hides. And he used to also, make buckskin dresses and beadwork and moccasins and leggings. So I used to watch him do that by the door in their house where the sunlight was. And then my grandmother with her sewing, and I look at my hands now and I can see my grandmother's hands. And it gives me comfort to know that I was raised with beautiful grandparents that shared knowledge.
No, I'd like to pick up on that for a couple of reasons. One was that our director, Tanya Hernandez Velasco, was very interested in seeing and filming Patricia and her colleagues' embroidery, working with their hands. And she'll be using images of Patricia working with her hands in our opera because it involves also scenic projections. But I also thought that this idea of how much we have learned from our grandparents, I connect with it quite a lot. And also Gilbert spoke of the same. You've spoken several times to me about what you've learned from your grandparents. Mm-hmm. And you both spoken about how some of the tribal elders would come and speak about Blue Lake discussions in the other room as you were growing up. Mm-hmm. And I wonder the traditions that you've received. I wondered if, Gilbert, you'd like to speak a little bit more about your own grandparents who you knew and what they passed on to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, my grandfathers and my father, like I said earlier, they came to visit a lot to our house, and they spoke a lot about the current events of the day, tribal business, different things like that, and then about cultural activities. And like I said, I like to listen to that kind of talk. And I remember my grandfather, I would ask questions. My grandfather told me, not every young person likes to hear this old man talk, but you like it, you ask questions. So I'm telling you things that I haven't told anybody else. So to me, those stories and different things that he shared, like I'm the only one in many cases that have heard those stories, and
and you tell them, I hope, to your own grandchildren.
I share them with my children.
Yeah.
But I really feel very fortunate about that. It's in a way that's kind of how I learned how tribal government works, which eventually I became part of tribal government as I got a little older. And then in other areas, one of my grandfathers was he was a traveler. He traveled to other Indian tribes, visiting other Indian tribes. He had friends over there that he visited with, and I thought that was pretty neat, pretty exciting to know somebody from another tribe, way off. And then when I got older, I ended up doing sort of a similar thing, and I even ended up meeting some of the people that were his friends, the old men over there that knew him.
Yeah.
And I got a chance to
of other tribes
converse with them among other tribes.
Other tribes, yeah.
And to me, being a Native American, American Indian, that's one of the most valuable aspects of life is just knowing other people. They become like family. And you have those relationships, and this is what my grandfather had, and when he was speaking about his people, and later on, I developed those same kind of relationships with the different people, and as a result, now, I have friends from other Indian tribes, kind of just across the country,
Yeah.
and we keep in touch.
Uh-huh.
We talk and communicate, especially now with the modern technology.
Well, this issue of grandparents is actually the other main drama of our opera.
It's true.
It's a story not only of land conflict and loss, but it's a story of family reconciliation, of this connection between father and son, which has been ruptured, and the connection between father and grandchildren that has been ruptured, but which becomes whole again when they meet and come together at the end of this short opera of ours, which is I wonder somehow whether this transmission of this love of land and what it means is connected quite naturally to the story about family.
And I think that's important because part of when we're circling around, like Gilbert said, our ancestors, they traveled a lot. And pre-Columbus, we were a main trade center at Taos Pueblo. So our men were always the leaders because they were the scouts, and people would come and they were, making sure our lands were safe. They're the ones who were in charge of what was going on in the Pueblo. So anytime, like when I left to go to New York, I didn't have a problem. My uncles and my grandfather had already been to New York. They won first place in the Macy's parade. Then they went to go. They went to go dance with the Rockettes. And
Are you kidding?
No, they thought my Uncle Little Joe was a grandma, and they took him into the dressing room. And they said, "Come on, Grandma, we're gonna dress you up really nice." And so he was in the dressing room with those Rockettes, and he didn't say, "Oh, I'm not a grandma." He just stayed in the dressing room with the Rockettes. But you think about those stories, and you think about the brilliance of our people. That's why I used to say, like, if they were doing it with just like raw as can be, not knowing what was ahead of them, but being honest and just being pure about who they are, not trying to be pretentious, then that's the most valuable personality you want in the room, right? No pretentious. So I try to stay true to who I am wherever I go, and listening to the stories and the direction that our elder has brought today. It always humbles me. It always makes me know how much further I still have to go. And, that's the pride that we live with. But yeah, so I think that kind of, knowing those stories, knowing the places that they have gone to, you can't pay for that in college. I went to 7 years of college, but yet my ancestors' stories of how they survived. Even my grandpa, when he said that they would go pick potatoes in Colorado, and they would have potato picking contests with the Mexicans to see who was going to get the next field, and they would win. But then they would run out of potatoes to pick, and they didn't want to go back home because it was like only a week away. So they would do performances in the town square. So they would do like the eagle dance, the pipe dance, and then the crowd was getting bored. So one time they did the matachina dance, and that same Uncle Little Joe, short with long hair, they made him into the little Malinche. So it's those kinds of, resourceful, innovative stories. I guess as an artist that I lean to, like, nothing can be horrible as long as it's lending itself to the truth. Then as an artist, that's what you want.
As you've spoken like a true artist. And yeah, well, this has been for me similarly. I knew my great grandfather, and he used to speak to me in Spanish. And he also incidentally lost his land at one point.
Oh.
But he also sang, and I know that singing and dancing is an important part and we have a tape of him singing, believe it or not, and you had mentioned that singing was a part of your what you experienced from your grandfather, and I know dancing for your family, which of course are such big parts of our lives as musicians. I thought maybe it's time, in case I'd invite our audience to put questions in the chat, and that they can be texted to me. I'd be happy to ask your questions and put them either to Gilbert or to Patricia, and we'll just keep speaking about these issues until someone sends us something. But would you the musical tradition of the Pueblo, I think, is not written down. I was actually once told by the director of the foundation here that Aaron Copland, who's a famous American composer, once came to the Pueblo, and he tried to figure out the rhythms and he couldn't for the life of him write them down. He said they're so individual, and yet you teach them, or you're taught those only through an oral tradition, I think. Correct?
Right. You learn by being there and by listening. And not just once, but many times. And this is how you learn when you're in an oral tradition.
And did you start learning those songs? How old were you when you started learning those songs?
Well, I guess my earliest memory was probably maybe I was about 5 or 6 years old when I had my own little songs, I would compose my own little. Little songs, just my own, but they had the Indian, tone to them, and I would cut out little figures, and I would make them dance,
Oh, and would you sing and have them dance?
Making them dance,
Yeah.
Well, that's my earliest memory. And then as I grew up, I continued to develop that interest, and that became my life. And to tell the truth, many of the friends that I talk about across the country, I made those friends through singing. They had the similar interest there. We would share songs, and in that way, we got to know each other.
Even though you were singing, and you were singing in your own language, it's not just humming, right? Do you put words in your language to it, or is it just in fact
singing among American Indians? It has a lot of similarity, you might say, because these are sounds that you make through your vocal cords, your mouth, your nose, and
sure,
your very breath. You let all of that out, and so there. In that way, there's a commonality among many Indian tribes of songs. And then with some tribes, there's even a closer similarity of songs. So in that way, we would learn each other's songs. I would like a song that he's singing. I would learn it, and then same way, they would learn our song. In that way, or some of the songs from Taos Pueblo, made it across the country. And for many years, and I guess up to now, Taos Pueblo has had a reputation in the Indian world of creating composing some of the most beautiful round dance songs. These are social songs that are sung sort of almost universally by.
Did you call them round dance?
Round dance because you're the dance is a circular dance with the singers in the middle, And so those songs are the many tribes. They have their own versions of round end songs. Some of them are similar, some of them are a little different. But we end up sharing songs and learning each other's songs. And of course, I went to an Indian school that was more or less a national school for American Indians, and tribes from across the nation were there, and I made many friends, and we shared songs and dances, and
already as a young man.
We had a club there, Indian club we called it, and we would share songs and dances and this kind of thing.
So, that's wonderful.
Did
you share? Have you shared your met other designers and worked with?
Well, of course, I'm coming from a family of singers and dancers. We did the same thing, but when we were traveling to perform, like maybe in Denver at the museums or for Cultural Day in, Chicago or whatever, we were put in rooms with other ethnicities, like Dutch people, Japanese people, people from South Africa. And I was that little kid who would leave my family and say, I gotta go see what they open their suitcase, what kind of outfits they have in there. And my Aunt Sally, we lost a couple of years ago, rest her soul. She was so good to me. She was so kind. She said, okay, you can go for a little, but don't be a nuisance. I see that it was through song and dance that our cultures are all backstage together, embracing one another. And there's a magic that comes to performance art with people. I've gone then to South Africa to help South African designers, and listening to the South African people and their stories of being creative. And it's with the arts that people are able to come to the same place of it's coming from your heart. When you're creating this, it's like I said, it's the mood. When I'm creating a garment, it doesn't have a lyric, sometimes doesn't have a song. It just has a mood. And that's culture, that's culture.
We have an interesting question here, which is perhaps a sensitive one, culturally for you both as members of Pueblo. You had mentioned, the person asks, I wonder if Patricia could speak more about what she keeps private, respect for her people, community, and tribe, and what she shares with all through her art. Obviously, what you keep private, you keep private. You can't really.
I have a really great, fun answer for that. That's really simple. So basically, like if I shared something that was personal of mine, then you might have to take care of it. And I don't know how much of me you want to take care of. So, we all have our places that is a sanctuary, right? And it's easier to explain like that because we all have our responsibilities of taking care of what's been given to us. And so what's been given to our people is ours to take care of. And we don't put that responsibility on anybody else.
Well, one of the things I was struck by too in your presentation, Gil, was that you said we're a very conservative people, but adaptive, and there is it is perhaps by conserving so carefully conserving your traditions that you are still here and a cohesive community. And I know that there are a lot of deliberations at the Pueblo that are not only private to us as outsiders, but that are private and that many of the Taos Pueblo are not privy to until they might reach a certain age of responsibility and take part. And I'm not sure whether you want to speak to that in any other way. But it is something that I think, I have noticed and that it's something interesting that someone should pick up there is a great, you keep so much culture together by somehow keeping it in large part about to yourselves.
Mhm.
And
Well, just to clarify, when I say conservative, of course, I don't mean in a political sense.
right.
Yeah, I use the term conservative because we like to keep things the old way. We like to do things the way that we've been doing them. We conserve those ways, that way of life, and continue to practice it. And of course, over the years, changes may invariably happen, but for the most part, practices are kept intact as they have been learned, as we know them, and that's what I mean. At the same time, we are a very adaptable people, and I think one of the uh, examples is, for example, when the Spanish explorers and missionaries came into the area. In our case, the early meetings were not hostile meetings. They were meetings of great curiosity towards each other, and it was later years that it got confrontational when people changed, different generations, but I tend to feel like there was a certain level of respect amongst towards one another, and this is how our people were able to accept Christianity, being a very conservative people with our Indian way of life that we've had for hundreds and hundreds of years to accept a Christianity, that
that it's
in a sense, the way I see it,
in a very non-exclusive way.
It closed the circle for us. We became whole. And so that's what we are now. We're whole now, and they have to take a level of being able to adapt, and not only in that area, but in many other things, we were able to take what was new to us and adapt it to our way of life. And like some of the things that maybe had a Spanish name for it, when I say we Indianized the name, and it became an Indian object, and we adapted things like that.
Well, I found it extraordinary that not only has Patricia brought her love of the land into our costumes, and you can see that as when they step out on stage, but also that you were interested in paying homage to some of the people you grew up with in the Hispanic cultures, and you took inspiration from the Santeros for some of your costumes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes, that's true. And I think what Gilbert was saying, that, we're adaptive. In order for you to be adaptive, you have to be humble. You have to be able to be that person, to see that we're on an equal level ground plane. We become the human race rather than just this like, fighting.
Rather than the rat race.
Yeah, than the rat race, right? And so when I heard the story that Tanya was telling me, I thought about my Spanish friends. I thought about the people that I grew up with on Canyon Road in Santa Fe, and going into their homes and their mother making me tortillas with chili. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, I'll do whatever chore you want. Just give me that tortilla fresh, and just having that camaraderie of wonderful friendship, going to Catholic school for 10 years and seeing the Santos in the houses and really knowing what that Spanish home was like. And so I thought about the beautiful Santeros, how some of them were Native American as well. And that then is the relationship that Gilbert was talking about, that, they've been able to meld together. And I think when people can bring peace rather than fighting who's more important, who's right, that's where the real human strength is. That's when you are whole. That is the full circle. And
well, you break bread together, and I have to tell you that I'm still enjoying the bread that your friend from Santo Domingo brought up the other night when we were working with you. And that is, all right. We have another question here. It says, "This is such a wonderful presentation, and it's inspiring to hear about the perseverance of the Taos people who never gave up the fight of their lands. It is interesting to think how this idea of persevering the land rights will be woven into the setting of the French opera. If you could give us an idea of that." Well, it's we are setting our 1770 French opera in sort of somewhere in the 19th century in this area of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, which was the home to, as you've heard today, not only the Taos people, but of course the Ute Indians, and then the Spanish colonialists, and the issues of land that was given as land grants by the Mexican governor to private individuals, and the conflicts that arise when huge tracts of land are owned by individuals, and those individuals decide to stop allowing people who have used that land for hundreds of years the ability to use that land. That principle is directly in our opera, and it's this situation in this part of the country, which is similar to the situation in 1770 France. And because we're always interested in finding ways to make the opera that we do from the 18th century relevant to our contemporary eyes and ears and society, that we chose to come here and to learn the opera here, to be inspired by those who are from this area and who have experienced the issues that are similar to those in our opera, and set our opera here in the United States, in this fascinating place, which has both indigenous and Hispanic, and, as you both have said so well, a mix of cultures and influences that are unlike any place in the country.
Yeah, I would say it's a good pill for people to come and see a place that once was really at war with one another come to peace, and it gives a good example of really, where do you want to go? How do you want this, the rest of your life, and your grandchildren and your great grandchildren? How do you want their existence to be? What do you want them to learn to carry on? So you make those choices.
And one of the things I've said is our opera has what could be thought of as a slightly artificial happy ending, and I think that there was a requirement of these 18th century operas that they always everybody reconciles at the end. It just was what they did. And we don't want to suggest that in fact, these conflicts are all gone. They're still very, very active, and you're dealing with them as everyone out here is. And it doesn't look like they're ending anytime soon. But nonetheless, I think, being able to bring some sort of positive statement, and I'm hoping that by our through this project, by bringing all these people together to sort of think about, to learn from each other, and put that into an opera that will come up with something that we not only speaks, not untruthfully, we hope, to this culture, but that may speak to people in Washington or in New York again.
Right. So that's why then I thought it was really important to put in the Santero's work, And I really wanted to do more of a culture look in the embroidery, but I couldn't find any culture textile people right away to do it. So I got San Domingo ladies to do embroidery. That's like a Pueblo, but Spanish embroidery. But to me, I wanted the costume to have a statement of celebrating life, because Tanya kept saying, in the family home, they're really celebrating the land and the life. And in that period, the only reference that I saw that really celebrated life in a beautiful way was the way the Santeros were painting these beautiful saints. And then the way the culture, was whatever thread and yarn they had. They were.
Tell them what the culture is.
Oh, culture is a beautiful embroidery that the northern Spanish people of New Mexico and Southern Colorado were doing in that period. And they mostly did that for coverlets. So, but then I made it into some of the imagery into shapes. But in order for the Santo Domingo people, which are the Cuba people of Pueblos in New Mexico, in order for them to really enjoy it, I said, you know what, ladies, it's been a while since you've been able to do a show. We're coming out of COVID. Put your little twist on it. So we've had a really fun time.
Actually, I was surprised to learn that as you talk about going and meeting other Indians from around the country, from other tribes, I didn't realize that the two women who Patricia engaged to do the embroidery on some of these costumes were from Santo Domingo and Santa Ana Pueblos, and that she had never worked with them before. So she too is reaching out through clothes as you did through song, and it's a beautiful thing. I'm glad we could help make it happen.
Yes,
and
thank you.
We've actually we're almost 15 minutes beyond where we usually are, but we've taken some questions, and I think that I would like to give Gil the opportunity to have the final word in case he would like our audience to know something that they haven't heard before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you spoke about a happy ending.
Yeah.
And of course, for us, the happy ending has been that the Blue Lake lands were returned. That's a happy ending for us. But there is always unfinished business. It seems like always different conflicts arise that need to be resolved in various ways. And unfortunately, that's just the way that the world is, not just here, but other places. It's the way it is. But as human beings, we have to have the ability to be satisfied, with certain levels of achievement and this kind of thing, and not think about us always to be taken, and you have to be satisfied at some point there, and because after all, one of the things is that I think when people get to the end of their lives, they realize everything that used to mean a lot no longer means
That's
as much, and so we need to think about that. But like I said, the return of Blue Lake is it's a happy ending for us, and this is why we celebrate generally every 20 years for the new generations that are coming up, so that they know the story, they know what their people went through in generations past, and in this way, when they confront other issues in the future, they're going to also have perseverance to fight for their rights. And even though it looks impossible, that's one of the things. And I guess when I used to work at Los Alamos, a lot of times we were given very complex projects devices that were needed for scientific experiments that even the scientists might not know how to build it, but all he knew was what it needed to do. So
you had a goal, but you didn't know how you were going to get there.
How to get there. So it's up to you to figure out. That was your job, was to how do we get what he wants, and I always looked at breaking up things into components, manageable components. Even though the whole thing looked very complex, you break it up into manageable,
and then put them back together.
Yeah, put them back together, and you get what you want. And of course, life is what it is, and like you were saying earlier, there are continuing differences and conflicts that happen, but each new generation, they need to be taught by past generations, so that they don't repeat, some of the bad things that has happened.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way for us to end, and we thank you for being here and helping pass on what your knowledge and your experience with us. So, thank you both. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this and sharing thoughts like this.
Yeah, well, it's our privilege. All right. Well, we'll hope to see everybody at the opera soon.
Yes.
Okay.